I think we're up and recording. Hello, everyone. This is Carlos Garrido from Midwestern Marx. I had a seminar presentation on American socialism and trade unionism a couple of days ago now, and I decided it'd probably be a good idea to get on here and talk about some of the things that I mentioned in my presentation. Primarily today, I'm going to be going over the section on Big Bill Haywood and his text, Industrial Unionism. Industrial socialism. So let's see if I get this to work. All right. So Big Bill Haywood, he's perhaps one of the two or three most famous socialists in the U.S. at the beginning of the 20th century. He was originally a miner. Tried to be a cowboy for some years and then went back to mining. And he heard a speech from the Western Federation of Miners from a union leader, and that actually inspired him to be a union organizer. And he ended up becoming one of the bigger union organizers. And as I mentioned, let me see if I can locate my face in a place where you can see the screen. All right, that should be good. Right under Bill. That's symbolically. I'm symbolically under Bill. That's the guy at the top. So he becomes one of the founding members of the IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World. And the center idea of the IWW, which we're going to be going over now in a little bit, is that instead of having craft unions, unions that are dedicated to one specific skill in the workplace, let's organize all workers, right? And even people who are unemployed, right? So this is the people that Marx would have traditionally called the lumpen proletariat. Let's organize everyone, right? Because structurally, if you're organizing based on craft union, based on specific skills, you're setting yourself up for failure. That just makes it easier for the bosses to divide and conquer. When you go to the negotiating table, if one union inside a workplace represents carpenters and another one represents something completely different, the boss can divide, meet the demands of one and not the other, and you're overall splitting the working class. If you're trying to organize the working class within one big union, or at least two or three big unions, then you can have workplace solidarity and class solidarity and actually build a movement based on class status. And we're going to see that this is one of the main reasons why Bill endorses what's called industrial socialism or industrial unionism. He also calls it Marxist socialism. And I'm pretty sure he also calls it class unionism. It's unionizing on class lines, not on lines based on skills only, but on based on class. So he's one of the founding members of the IWW, and he was also a member of the Socialist Party of America. He actually represented it in the Labor Congress of the 1910 Second International. Campaigned with Debs in 1908. I think this ticket that I have behind me is from 1904. So the run after this one right here, he campaigned with Debs. Debs actually called him one time the Lincoln of Labor. Haywood was central in the splits going on in the Socialist Party of America at the time, and I think you could see it as a split going on around the world of rising popularity for socialism. It's a split that's centered around primarily tactics, right? There was a lot of people that were focusing on Edward Bernstein sort of Marxism. Edward Bernstein was a German philosopher who he was actually a friend of Marx. He got along. He talked to Marx a lot. He was a friend of Engels, but he didn't like the Robespierrean and the Hegelian side of Marx. He didn't like the part of Marx that realized that movements in history happen through revolutions. He didn't like that, and he in a way tried to synthesize Marx more with a Kantian deontological approach, and in a sense he can be seen as the beginning of reformist Marxism. the Social Democratic Party of Germany had been heavily influenced by him. Um, and in a way, this split can kind of be seen in the US between the more revolutionary Marxists and the reformist Marxists. And besides that split, there was also the split between the anarchists and the communists and the socialists. So in this time when we have a rising popularity of socialism around the world, we also have a rising fragmentation from, for example, the First International, where even the individualist anarchists of the United States were present alongside German communists, right? So there was a pretty wide coalition of forces that wanted to see the transcendence of capitalism, regardless of how different their tactics and how different the future societies they envisioned were, if they even envisioned future societies. Um, Regardless of if they were utopian in their approach or scientific, there was a sense that anyone who was against what is presently right now and who's not looking to have a step backwards should come together and fight for the transcendence of what is. Um, Towards the end of the 19th and the early 20th century, this begins to change. There's fragmentations all over the world. Even between Marxists, there's fragmentations, as I mentioned, the Bernsteinian Marxists, which I don't know how you can take away Hegel and the Robespierrean part of Marx and still call it Marxism, but they did it. But to be fair, Marx did say in some speeches, I believe in Amsterdam, that there could be peaceful revolutions and stuff, but to completely omit the part that's revolutionary in this guy is to, basically just toss him out, right? Specifically, since what he was mainly omitting was the tradition of historical materialism, and I don't think you can have a Marx without historical materialism. Specifically, we see it in the speech that Engels gives in the grave of Marx. What are the two discoveries that he talks about? He talks about historical materialism, and he talks about the labor theory of value, um, and the theory of surplus value. Um, all right, so he's in the middle of this Big Bill is in the middle of this big split in the Socialist Party between those that want to take the electoral approach, they want to take the mainly political approach, and who are generally aligned with the AFL-CIO, the American Federation of Labor, which was divided into craft unions, and then those who are were part of the funding of the IWW, and who want to take a more militant and more economic focused approach to changing the society. The important thing is that we also have to observe. In my seminar presentation, we talked about figures like Haywood and Debs, and De Leon and other American socialist thinkers. But I think even if we're just talking about Haywood, it's important to realize the shift that occurs in socialist politics in America from the early 19th century with utopian experiments, New Harmony, and a bunch of other utopian experiments all across the US, that the essential message that they were promoting was, here's the world as it stands right now. We don't like it, right? There's absurdities like, to quote Marx, there's something rotten at the core of a system that increases its wealth without diminishing its misery, right? That was the general distaste that the utopians had, the Owens, the Fouriers, the Saint-Simons, which I think Owen was the only one that had an actual community here, which is New Harmony. But the other people had a lot of communities inspired by their ideas. But the general notion was that there's something wrong in a system that has been able to civilize and have all this progress on one end, and on the other end has maintained and even expanded misery, right? So if we think about the writings of Thomas Paine was talking about how Native Americans didn't have misery. They might have not had the luxuries that civilization brought about. At that time, they call it civilization. They're not calling it capitalism yet. But they're not having the absurdities of having luxury in one place and misery in the other. But the general notion of early 19th century socialism in the US is this utopian approach that sees what is and says, F that. I don't want to be a part of that. I'm going to escape. So it's an escapist approach that tries to create an independent community outside. So this is a similar move as the hippie communes in the 60s, right? The hippie communes, once the movement of the 60s and the early 70s falls, and then there's not going to be any revolution, what they do is that they try to withdraw from society, right? And create their own little off the grid communities. This is in essence what utopian socialism kind of is. They all disliked what was and tried to create something new out of the blue, based on principles of cooperation and uh, and 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 education, sometimes on religious principles. And not to criticize the principles are great, and a lot of them overlap with some of the ethical beliefs of scientific socialists. But the point is that they were withdrawing from society, whereas the move with scientific socialism, which starts with Marx and Engels, this move tries not to withdraw from society but to confront the heart of it. It is directly aimed at not removing oneself from society, but removing society as it stands, or transforming it as it stands. Remember that Marx is writing in a time where there's a complete failure to the liberal ideals of liberty, fraternity, equality, pursuit of happiness, life, and these liberal universalized concepts that come about with the American Revolution and with the French Revolution. They were only materialized in a small group of people. And as time passes and industrialization goes on, it becomes very obvious that there's a polarization between the toiling masses and those who are able to enjoy these sort of universalized principle that bourgeois society brings about, while it removes the structures of the feudal order. So um, so Marx represents the shift towards scientific socialism, and in the U.S., this is what we see in the late 19th century. We see a clear difference between the socialists, whether they were conscious of it or not. They're focused now on the class struggle, not on removing themselves from the system, but on fighting the system through the revolutionary agent in it. And that revolutionary agent was the proletariat, the industrial worker here in the U.S. And we're going to see this clearly with Haywood. All right, so Haywood is writing this work, Industrial Socialism, in 1911. And in this year, as I mentioned, there were pretty big splits in the Socialist Party, right? Between those who aligned more with craft union approach of the AFL-CIO, not it's the AFL-CIO now, but the AFL, and those who were aligned more with the tactics of the IWW, which are considered to be more anarchistic, dependent, directed more at the tactics of direct action and straight confrontation in the economic sphere, which are not necessarily un-Marxist, right? The traditional Marxist framework to revolution was economic organization precedes political involvement. Is once you have organized your workplace, which is naturally what capitalism helps you do, it socializes production. All the workers are now here together. Once you have that organized, then you can start a workers' party or a communist socialist party. Industrial socialism. Like I said, he writes this in the middle of a split, and the work is quite polemic. I'm going to talk about that more in the next slide. All right. Haywood gets charged under the Espionage Act, and he gets arrested in 1918. In 21, he's out on bail, and he skips it. He flees to the USSR. And in the USSR, he's part of the labor government of Lenin. In 28, he dies in Moscow, and half of his ashes are spread in the Kremlin Wall in Necropolis, next to Lenin, and the other half in Chicago, near where the Haymarket Strike Monument was. All right, so the context. As I said, it was quite polemic. It brought a big split, and that split can be seen between the debates of Haywood and Hillquit. So Hillquit ends up calling industrial socialism a good anarchist doctrine, diametrically opposed to the accepted principles, to the accepted policies of socialism, and that the policies of direct action always led to terrorism, demoralizing, and leaving a stain on the socialist movement. So Haywood responded by saying that Hillquit didn't understand the concepts which he brings about in industrial socialism, and he challenges him to a debate. The debate really centered around the tactics of economic organizing. So Hillquit argued for the AFL, and he said, I think one of the things he said was that in 5 years the AFL would be fully socialist. That didn't happen. The AFL was also mildly racist at the time, so that did not help the cause at all. Haywood argued for the IWW and its tactics, of course, as he was a founding member of the IWW. After the debate, a black member of the Socialist Party of America, Hubert Harrison, went up to Haywood and told him while Douglas won the debate, Lincoln carried the country. So he's referring to the famous debates between Abe Lincoln and Stephen Douglas, where Stephen Douglas famously won the debates, but Lincoln obviously ended up winning the race. All right, so some of the basic principles of industrial socialism, he starts by just basically mentioning what are some of the basic absurdities of the industrial society which Americans were living in at the time. Uh, and in essence, this is kind of just basic Marxism. You have the people that are the working masses, the ones that are creating the wealth, and then the ones that are extracting the wealth directly from those that are working for it. The latter group lives in idle luxury, and the former group lives in endless toil, never really seeing any of the wealth they create besides that which they take home as wages, um, which barely is enough to meet their subsistence. Um, Again, one of the things about the time we're living in right now, at least it seems to me that uh, our time is more like this epoch which we're talking about in Bill Haywood, the late 19th, early 20th, than it was in the 50s. A lot more like the early 20th century than the mid 20th century. Um, and when we see the early 20th century, is we see the rise of socialism. So I think we're starting to see that again, except that the socialism that's rising now isn't to the ankles of the socialism that was rising in the early 20th century, but we're trying to change that. All right. So he says the great wealth of the US has been created by its toilers alone. It has been wasted by its idlers, by the capitalists. The working people are sweating, starving, and dying. And again, the way he introduces it is the fact that around the whole world, capitalism seems to be falling apart. Um, Writes this in 1911. The October Revolution in Russia hasn't happened yet, but it's definitely on the way. And then, of course, he distinguishes between reformist socialists and Marxist socialists, which again, this can be seen as the lens between Bursteinian Marxist and revolutionary Marxist. It can be seen between the distinction of socialist and communist, whatever you want to look at it as. But um, and then he says the wonderful, terrible fact of the world is the present condition of the working class. Wonderful in the sense that it provides the necessity for actually building working class solidarity. And terrible in the fact that it was horrific, right? If we look at the writings of, for example, someone like Mother Jones, the stuff that the kids were having to deal with at that time is just absurd. We're talking 6, 7, 8 year olds working 12 to 14 hours in factories, losing fingers, losing scalps. Horrific. It's the same system we have now, though, so don't feel too good about it. The only reason why things seem a little bit different is because of the communists, the socialists, and the anarchists that organized in order to improve the condition for working class people. It wasn't because of the good heart of the capital. All right. So here he's talking about the fact that if you come from a working class family, you're not going to be a capitalist. You can try as best as you want. You can save up your money, start a little small business, but 9 out of 10 of them fail. And the ones that are successful, you end up being no better than a wage earner. All right. If you're born into a working class family, if that's the world you're thrown into, if we want to talk in Heideggerian language or existentialist language, we're thrown into the world. Um, if you're thrown into the world and you're a working class person, that's where you're gonna stay. All righty. So what does this lead to? Well, naturally, as a young person, you start off pretty hopeful. You think that you buy into the myth that if you work hard enough, you're gonna pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You're gonna do all these things. Um, Eventually, you realize that's all bullshit. Maybe you try to own a small business, you fail, as statistically is likely that you will. Eventually, you end up in despair. And what's the thing about despair? Despair helps the capitalist. Because if you have a workforce that is in despair, are they going to organize? No, they're not going to organize. Think about it. Most Americans today are depressed. So if you're watching this, you probably have been depressed at some point. How productive are you when you're depressed? Not too productive, right? It's hard to be productive when what you feel is utter nothingness, no hope. Humans need hope. We're hopeful creatures. Capitalism kills hope. Um, so he says socialism is a message of hope. It is addressed to the working class. It will save the working class, or rather, show the working class how to save itself. When enough workers understand socialism, believe in it, and are firmly resolved to have it, the time would be ripe for change. What does this tell us? Well, we're in very similar conditions. Right now, because of the pandemic, 40 million people are underemployed. I think the numbers have gone down now, but 40 million people lost their jobs. In a developed country that is the only one that doesn't have healthcare, where healthcare is tied to the job, that means that 40 million people who lost their job probably lost their healthcare as well in the middle of a pandemic. That is absurd, right? While we keep funding and giving money to the military industrial complex, we keep giving money to to the big capital. We give money to big capital, and even the stimulus check that gave most of us $1,200, that went to rent, right? That was just a subsidy for my landlord. Woo. All right. But the message that I want to connect here with our present condition is that essentially what he's saying here, when enough of the workers understand socialism, believe in it, and are firmly resolved to have it, the time will be ripe for change. What does this mean? Right? That the material conditions are already there, right? And it's something we experience today. The material conditions are here. People are struggling. You ask any working class person, do you have an extra $1,000 in case you have an emergency? No. The conditions, the material conditions are here. The subjective ones are not, right? The subjective conditions are not here. And maybe that's because socialism has not only been propagandized against, made seem as something foreign, but socialism has also been hijacked by a group of petty bourgeois, by a petty bourgeois class in the U.S. that they don't really have the interest of the working class at heart because they don't think the working class is the revolutionary agent. They think um, other communities are the revolutionary agents, and that doesn't mean we have to exclude other communities to actually have socialism and only focus on workers. But the reality is that if teachers go on a strike, what's going to happen? Right? This is an example I always use. If teachers go on a strike, maybe some shit goes down in the university or in the school, high school, whatever. But if industrial workers go on strike, that fucks up the whole economy. That's where power is at, right? So any movement that attempts to transcend the current system must necessarily have as the heart of the movement the working class. Don't tell me the workers are racist. Don't tell me the workers are this or that. I don't care. You change their mentality and you realize that you can help them see the way forward. That if they have been lied to see their enemy as an immigrant, as a black person, as a gay, whatever, you have the truth in your hand. You have the truth. The truth is that their enemy is not any person of color, it's not an immigrant, it's not a Muslim. Their enemy is their boss. That's the one that keeps them in the condition they're in. That's a truth, universal truth. It's true everywhere. With that truth, there's no working class person who you're going to sit down and talk to that's not going to understand that. The thing is that our job as educators, theorists, whatever the hell you want to call us, is to talk to the masses. But the thing is that they already feel the truth, right? I'm a TA. I'm not a toiler, right? So I don't feel exploitation as a working class person feels it. But every time I've talked to someone in my organizing, it feels like I'm talking to the most well-versed Marxist theorist. Why? Because unlike us, the theorists in academia, these people feel it in their bones every day. Every day, they feel the hard hand of capital. So, and related to Big Bill Haywood, he has a famous quote: "I've never read Capital, but I have the marks of capital all over my body." I think that summarizes it nicely. Socialism is a message of hope. All right, so part of having the workers realize what socialism is and how their interest is tied to it is helping them realize how it is that we got here. So what Big Bill Haywood does here is that he gives an analogy. As a good Platonist, he realizes that analogies usually do the job. And if you've read Daniel de Leon, that man's the king of analogies. Excellent analogies. But Big Bill essentially here gives an analogy of an island in which 10 people get off. One of them has a document that says that their great grandfather owned the island. And since he owned the island, now he owns the island. It doesn't matter that their parents and their grandparents and great grandparents didn't work a lick of the island. He owns it because, you know. So now he tells the other 9 people that they have to work for him. They have to pay him rent. Blah, 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 right? There's the point, right? Old money. You trace where capital is and where capital came from, and it accumulates through exploitation, but its original source is in old money. And this is crazy because it's already being seen at this time, 1911. It's already seen that that there's a few generations that have not had to work just because their generation, their great grandfather, was part of the class of early capitalists that actually kind of did a little bit of work, and he talks about that afterwards too. But part of understanding how we're here is understanding the story, not just what is, but how it is that we got here, the historical context. And he talks about automation and capitalism. This is one of the most absurd contradictions of capitalism. It is the only system in which you can make a machine which is supposed to limit the time of work, and working people go crazy when that happens. Why? Because instead of automation, meaning that people can work less and live the same or better lives, have more time for leisure, have more fun, automation in capitalism means that the workers are pitted against the machine. So he says these foolish workers work harder than ever they did before. If they cannot keep up with the machines, they're discharged and others hired. Yeah, these foolish workers work harder. Instead of working less, instead of having more leisure time, they work harder with automation. It makes no sense. It only makes sense in a system that puts profit before people, that tries to maximize capital and not consider growth in terms of qualitative development of human flourishing, but in terms of quantitative accumulation of capital. Development of capitalism. So here he talks about basically how industrialization has come about. So I don't know if you want to read the quotes, pause it, or whatever, but this is basically the concrete examples he gives for the story that he tells earlier. Okay, this is the same thing, but there's a cool quote here that I want to read. The socialist movement has come to place the machines, the shops, the railroads, the land, and the mines in the possession of the workers. That will mean freedom, security, and opportunity for all who live. Yay. All right, so this is just common sense. If you work it, you should own it, right? One of the things about this time in the US, and it probably sounds even unconceivable right now, is that capitalism as a concept was scarier as a word than what socialism was. Capitalism as a concept was as scary as communism is now to the average American. Why? Because capitalism was connected to this process of industrialization. They were looking at capitalism only as that section of capitalism that is related to industrialization and automation and pitting workers against machines, and also to financial capital, right? And the taking of the lands of the farmers and all that went along with that, and speculation and yes. So yeah, capitalism as a concept was as scary as communism is now. Um, a lot has changed in 100 years. Surplus labor, surplus value, profit. So this is basic Marxist theory of surplus value. You can pause it and read it if you want, but I'm going to give you a really simple example that was given to me probably 5 or 6 years ago now when I first started reading Marxism. If I have $1 worth of cotton and I give it to you, and you get the cotton and you make a shirt with it, and then I sell the shirt for $10. How much value did you add to the cotton? Well, if we translate it to money, you've added $9 to the cotton. Am I going to give you $9? No. I'm not going to give you anywhere near that. I'm going to give you $1 if you're lucky, probably 50 cents. Yeah, that's exploitation. At this time, most people were working 10 to 14 hours, right? They were creating as much value in the first 1 or 2 hours as they were being paid, right? So their wages was equivalent to probably the first hour of their work. So if they did as much work as they're getting paid in the first hour, does that mean the workers get to go home? No. They still got to stay and work the next 9, 10, 11 hours. And that time, that's called surplus labor. That's extra labor that is unpaid. And that's what creates surplus value, which is what accumulates the capital. And when it's sold, that's what creates profit for the capitalist. That's where profit comes from. It comes from unpaid labor. If the worker owned what he produced, the concept of profit will be superfluous. Okay. All right, building solidarity and wretchedness. One of the things that I mentioned. So one of the things that capitalism does, right, and it's part of the contradictions that Engels mentions in Socialism and Utopian and Scientific and a bunch of other works, is that the process of production is socialized for the first time ever. For the first time ever, things are not made individually, but they're made collectively, socialized. The capitalist puts under a roof a group of workers to work collectively on a project. Now, of course, they don't have any say in what they're making and all of the jargon from chapter 4 of the manuscripts of 44. They're alienated. They don't have any say. The point is that the capitalism brings workers into the same location. And part of bringing workers into the same location is creating the possibility of class solidarity, right? Of looking to the side and looking to the other side and realizing that, holy shit, there's a factory here full of people who are experiencing the same wretchedness, exploitation, alienation as I am. Although in that chapter, Marx talks about alienation from your fellow man as well, but whatever. Capitalism creates the possibilities for class solidarity, specifically working class solidarity. Um, if we think about it, for those of us who have studied philosophy and Hegel's phenomenology of spirit, the famous section on the Lord and bondsman, right, is only after the bondsman has toiled for a certain amount of time. It's only after he has experienced wretchedness and slavery that he looks out the window and he sees that everything that was made by his hands, and that in that moment he begins to destroy the concept that he is dependent on the Lord, and rather realizes that it is the Lord that is dependent on the bondsman. So in a sense, the central, I guess, philosophical idea that you can abstract from this is that it takes a certain amount of wretchedness to realize a revolutionary potential. It takes bringing the workers together under a common roof to produce, and forcing them into conditions of wretchedness for them to realize their common interest as workers, right? This is why, as capitalism develops and becomes even more polarized, it becomes possible to actually observe the laws of capitalism. So Marx couldn't have happened 200 years before Marx, right? Even if we think of capitalism starting in 1492 with Columbus, which is what's traditionally, conceived of as the beginning of the primitive stage of accumulation of capital. Um, the point is that it it takes the development of capital to a certain extent to be able to analyze the laws of it, right? And this is something that if we've read Lukács talks about, that Marx's the laws that Marx discovers of capitalist accumulation um, only become discoverable in the time in which he speaks, right? Specifically, he also speaks on historical materialism and the fact that history moves through the struggle between classes, the famous dictum from the manifesto: the history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggle. This is something that's only discoverable already once the, the system has developed to a certain extent. Think about it. Another good example is think about a bookshelf. If you have 10, 15 books, you can't structure it. You can't determine the laws that are structuring the bookshelf. But now if you've accumulated 3,000 books, you can begin to see what the structure of the books are in the bookshelf, right? It always takes a certain level of quantitative accumulation to be able to analyze what are the essential laws, the essential structures, the logic that is hiding under this. What is the hidden kernel? We want to think about it dialectically. It takes a quantitative accumulation in order to have that qualitative leap in which one can begin to analyze scientifically what's going on here. What are the structures that play, right? You go from having a bookshelf that's not structured, and then you put one more book in there, and you're like, oh, wait a minute, there's a structure here, right? Quantity, quality. All right. Let me look back at the slide and see if there's anything I missed. So the point is that this condition of wretchedness that brings workers together and gives them a common condition is the basis for establishing class consciousness and solidarity among the working class, and it's a necessity in order to partake in the class struggle. Competitive capitalism. This was something very interesting. He goes in this one section. I just pulled the last quote from it. He's talking about how capitalism develops from competitive capitalism to capitalism based on small companies, to capitalism based on corporations, trust, and monopoly, and then imperial capitalism, right? Marx, of course, does the same thing as early as the German ideology. He starts to lay out the development from smaller to big capital. Big industry, I think, is the concept that he uses. But this development all the way to imperialism, Marx doesn't really touch too much on imperialism, because imperialism really is a phenomenon of that later part of the 19th century, the early 20th century, because it's inherently connected to finance capital, right? And the interesting thing is that Haywood is talking about finance capital, right? So one of the things that Lenin says is that the first victim of imperialism is, guess who? Take a guess. Cuba, with the Platt Amendment. It's the first victim of imperialism. So in Lenin's text, let's see. There we go. In this text right here, imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. He talks about how capitalism goes from competitive capitalism all the way to imperialism. But he writes that in 1916. And here's Haywood, a man who didn't go to school, all right? A laborer, an organizer. Well, Lenin technically also didn't really, he wasn't an academic or anything like that. He wrote pretty serious academic stuff, but all right. He says, so the nation is coming to be governed as an empire. Mr. Morgan is now the chief ruler of this empire. He is the emperor of trust. Under him, there are kings and dukes and who rule separate trusts and corporations. Right. So I thought this was pretty cool. I pulled it out because this is being said 5 years before Lenin writes imperialism. All right. Capitalist government and industrial socialism. The government is essentially under capitalism, just a tool of the ruling class, right? Just like under feudalism, it was the tool of the aristocracies. Under slave society, it's a tool of the slavist. Under capitalism, the government is a tool of the capitalist. And even the institutions that pretend to be in solidarity with workers, institutions that are meant to protect workers, are still there for the interest of capital. So we have the example of one of the second to last video we just posted from Comrade Eddie. He talked about how OSHA right now, the organization that's meant to protect the conditions of the workplace for workers, they received 10,000 notices and complaints, and they only checked up on 2. And the ones that they did check up on, they called upon the bosses the day before to tell them that they were coming in for an inspection, something that's actually not legal. They're supposed to do the inspections. Spontaneously, but that just goes to show that even the institutions that are meant to protect workers under capitalism just have the interest of capital at heart, unless the working class is properly organized in the economic realm and it could have capital in the state by the balls. All right, so that's too long of a quote to read. I'm not reading it. You could pause it and read it if you want. Class struggle and socialism. So again, this is essential and a massive difference from the socialists of the late and the earliest 19th century in the US, the utopians and the scientific. Concerning the class struggle between worker and capitalist, Bill says that with every step in the growth of industry, peace between the capitalist and the worker becomes less likely. Soon the capitalist lives an altogether different life from the worker. He associates only with his own kind. He builds himself a palace and travels about the world. Meanwhile, the worker continues to work and sweat in the shop. In the shop, yeah. Neither he nor any of the members of his family meet the capitalist or his family. The capitalist's children go to college, the worker's children go to work. Again, that relation of quantity to quality, that separation, that development that happens in capitalism that allows for the polarization, that allows for the system's logic to be visible. That's seen here in the relationship between the owning and the working class. All right, so this is perhaps the most central point and the most original point in the text, the distinction between craft unions and what he calls class or industrial unions. Craft unions. He said some unionists always wish to organize only the skilled workers in small groups and thus advance the price of their labor. Such unions are craft unions or trade unions. These do not care much for the interests of the working class as a whole. They merely wish to help themselves to better conditions. If only the capitalists give in to their demands, they may continue to oppress members of other crafts or unorganized workers as much as they please. Yet this structure is inherently divisive. It's a structure based on differentiation and not unity. Um, so it obviously doesn't have the interests of the working class at heart, but just a specific sect with a specific skill. Class slash industrial unionism, on the other hand, is one in which it attempts to unite all workers against all the capitalists. Another thing we have to remember, the capitalists are organized. The capitalists are organized, especially in the transition from competitive to monopolistic, imperialistic capital. Capitalists are organized. That's the only way they're able to maintain power and control the institutions. It's less and less of them, so it's easier to organize. Uh, Class unionism is one which attempts to unite all the workers against all the capitalists. It recognizes the fact that all the workers are suffering from the same cause. It sees the capitalists, whenever driven to it by their interests, unite solidly against the workers. And usually, the advocates of class unionism have been wise enough to foresee that if the workers wish to permanent relief from wage slavery, they must secure complete control of the industries. This is something interesting. So here we have scientific socialists talking about the elimination of wage slavery. But if we look before scientific socialism got to the US and figures like Bronson and other radical Republicans, um, we see that a critique of wage slavery was already prevalent even before the abolition of chattel slavery, right? So the U.S. has a strong tradition of pushing for um, pushing against the hierarchical structure of capitalist corporations, or at least hierarchical and exploitative, because um, hierarchy itself doesn't have anything inherently bad with it. Um, Cooperative organizations have people who lead it, and that doesn't mean that it's an exploitative relationship. But here we see the sort of tradition of the critique of wage slavery manifested in Bill Haywood. Um, yeah, class unionism tries to ally itself with the capitalists whenever it can, whereas the other one is focused on the struggle, not on trying to harmonize. Which again, that harmonizing approach is central to utopian socialists, who think that you can just go away and create a harmonious community with everyone, right? Scientific socialism realizes that no, the worker and the proletariat, I mean, the worker and the capitalist have antagonistic interest. It's not They're not going to be friends unless the capitalist is a class trader and you have a sort of Engels figure. But yeah, the motto of industrial unionism, and this remains the motto of the industrial workers of the world, is one union of all workers in an industry, all industries in one union, right? So that's instead of a differentiating approach as craft union is, that's an approach that unites. Also, he says that this industrial union is also revolutionary. It's revolutionary in its nature because it has a class-based essence, and it's sort of an oxymoron to talk about revolutionary, uh, having a revolutionary essence and being passive. So that implies that action against exploitation requires agitation, publicity, strikes, boycotts, political force, all the elements and expressions of discontent. Discontent is life, it impels action. Contentment means stagnation and death. All right. So he says, oh, this is a good quote. When the working class is well enough organized industrially and possesses the necessary political power, it will take the whole product. The capitalist must then go to work. Socialism thus will be a reality. Socialism is industrial democracy is socialism. Um, I think I'm gonna read the second quote. It's a good one, and I'm gonna speak on why I have it up. The Union and the Party, Socialist Party of America. I don't know why I have a U there. It's supposed to be an A. Together make war upon the enemy, the capitalist class. This fight is, first of all, a shop fight. It is a fight in the economic level. It takes place at the point of production where the workers are at present enslaved. Until this is understood, there can be no real understanding of socialism. Where has this gone in the US? Now in the US, we have people who think we can have a revolution without ever talking to workers, without ever organizing workplaces. And that's just lunatic. And it's not only lunatic, but it demonstrates that the socialism that these people are striving for is not the same socialism that we're striving for. Their socialism is a socialism that is related to their petty bourgeois class interest. There has to be this realization, right? Because you can't talk about a revolutionary movement and not focus on economic organization as the basis of it. And then once you have economic organization, strive for political uh, 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 political engagement and political grabbing of the resources of the state and offices and stuff like that. We've seen this with Sanders, man. Yeah, of course, Sanders wasn't a Marxist or anything, um, but the structure was political organization, endless hope. That through political organization we can end up having economic organization, and that terribly failed. Right? Um, it failed because of a lot of reasons, but I think this was one of the main reasons. If that political struggle would have grown out of the economic struggle, it would have been a lot different. So here we have a quote by James Connolly, the Scottish-born Irish revolutionary who died in 1916 in the Easter Uprising. Therefore, political power must, for the working class, come straight out of the industrial battlefield as the expression of the organized forces of labor, else it cannot come at all. What happens when it does come from the industrial battlefield? He has a good quote that says something along the lines of, then the state is forced to either bend or break. Once you have the economic sphere organized, once your power is there, getting power in the political realm is just a piece of cake from there. You have the state by the balls. All right. So then he talks about government again in capitalism. Another cool quote. He says, the political government of capitalism has served its purpose. Its day is done. The Socialist Party can seize it, prevent its doing further harm to the workers, and at the proper time, throw it on the scrap heap where it will repose with the outworn tools for the protection of which it was organized. That was a cool quote, and it reminded me a lot of, where are you, buddy? I guess it's in the other room, whatever. It reminded me a lot of a quote from Engels in the Origins of Family, Private Property, and State, where he says, the society will organize production on the basis of a free and equal association of the producers. I think I might have mistyped. Of the producers will be put the whole machinery of the state where it will then belong. Wow, I am illiterate. Into the Museum of Antiquities by the side of the spinning wheel and the bronze axe. Page 232. All right. What would the Socialist Party do? Well, I think what would they do is encompass nicely in the previous quote that socialism will bring the shops, the socialist movement has come to place the machines, the shops, the railroad, the land, and the mines in the possession of the workers. This will mean freedom, security, and opportunity for all who live. Nice. What would the Socialist Party do? In this section, he essentially just talks about the three tenets of the Socialist Party: the theory of surplus value. We already went over that. Economic determinism, which really encompasses the materialist approach to history that Marx develops. and its dialectical structure, and at the center of that, of course, the class struggle. He says when the working class is strong enough, both in its union and at the ballot box, it will make an end to capitalism. Right. The final quote: Socialism will free not only the slave, but the slave driver and the slave owner. Socialism today makes war upon the enemies of the working class. When it is victorious, the enemies of the working class will embrace it. Peace and brotherhood will come with freedom. This is a reminder of the early Marx that really focused on the emancipation of man, right? The elimination of the contradiction between need and rationality. The contradiction political economy looks at between the citizen and man and the private individual, uh, the one that participates in civil society and the one that is in the private sphere. So, as Marx states in a few of his early works, proletariat not only emancipates itself, but it necessarily emancipates the rest of humanity. We also see this afterwards in Lukács, specifically Lukács demonstrates, I think, in the section on class consciousness of history and class consciousness. Yeah, he talks about how um, it is the capitalists are also uh, enslaved to the system, except that they are enslaved and see themselves as autonomous agents. The truth is that they are a little bit, but they're still playing a role in the system, a role that is replaceable with anyone else. Um, they're nothing but the embodiments of capital, right? So in a way, when you speak of socialism, it is the emancipation not only of the working class but of humanity overall. Alrighty, so I wanted to come on here and just speak on this. Yeah, then my presentation went into Daniel De Leon, but I hope I helped at least one of you learn something. Um, it's very interesting, this tradition of socialism that we have in all of its currents, right? I don't care how I do care how factional and sectarian it was, and we should try to learn from the mistakes that led to the separations and prevent them. But we have to be able to embrace all of these traditions of different socialists in the US, even the utopians, I would say. Um, the reality is that socialism and communism has been portrayed in the process of um, of Red Scares and stuff has been portrayed not only as something evil or authoritarian and whatever, has been portrayed as something foreign, something that doesn't belong to the United States. You speak of socialism and communism in a sense as an antithesis to American values. And I think here's where even the utopian socialists become instrumental when one states that the beginning of the 19th century, America was perhaps the most socialistic country out there, right? Or at least in the West. Um, the incredible amount of utopian socialist communities and the thought of the day was incredible. And later we get the radical Republicans and the Jacksonian Democrats, that the ones that weren't imperialistic and racist, the ones that focus on expanding democracy and that saw the revolution, the American Revolution, as not finalized, right? Yeah, we have a republic in the political realm, but we still have tyranny in the economic realm. You have tyranny when you wake up and you go to work and you have no say in what you do, but you still do what you're told for 10 to 12 hours. So part of the project of Midwestern Marx, part of the project which I personally am focused on researching, is embracing the tradition of socialism that is so rich in the U.S. Right? We're not gonna we're not gonna bring working class people into our movements if we have portraits of Mao hanging on our party meetings, right? We're not going to bring working class people into our movements if we approach them and we're like, Mao, you know? Or if I say Mao, you know, we can talk about Fidel, which I love. The point is, we have a tradition here of socialism and of communism. And as Cornel West says, socialism is as American as apple pie. Although I think apple pie is Dutch, but it sounds good. Um, I think it's very important to embrace figures like Big Bill Haywood, De Leon, Debs, and all of these figures, regardless of the currents of socialism that they were. I don't have to be MLs or specific, even Marxists, as long as they're socialists. We have to embrace them and recover that history, because our history books in the U.S. are not going to tell us who these people are. They're going to talk about the Rockefellers. They're going to talk about Carnegie, Morgan. They're going to talk about the wars, and they're going to promote American exceptionalism, and they're going to promote a view of history based on the secession of different capitalists. Um, and it is truly a pedagogical, uh, radical act to say, no, this isn't the history of America I'm going to embrace. The history of America I'm going to embrace is the one of Big Bill Haywood. It's the one of Roger Williams, right? It's the one of Thomas Paine. Even if we disagree in certain aspects with some of these thinkers, we are in their tradition. There's two Americas. There's the America that's imperialistic, the one that promotes exploitation, the one that's racist, the one that's misogynist. And then there's the America that's the complete antithesis of that, and that has spent since the beginning of the Virginia Project, that has spent its whole time until now fighting against it. We're talking men, women, black, white, everyone. There's two Americas, right? And I refuse to be told that the only one is the one that represents capital, imperialism, racism, and everything else that's implied in those terms, right? Especially when we have such a rich tradition of fighters and theorists and thinkers against that sort of America as the global hegemon, as the global exploiter of the world, right? Um, so that's the tradition we have to embrace. And I think it starts by promoting figures like Big Bill Haywood or Debs or other figures in the movement, Harry Haywood, right? Um, this is the task of socialists in the US, to recapture this history of our thinkers and use it, not just theoretically, but aesthetically as well. The aesthetic of a movement it's important, right? Especially nowadays in such a symbol-based world. Everything is evaluated by symbols, right? Like I said, we're not going to do anything. We're showing up to meetings with portraits of Mao. Um, but if we have Big Bill Haywood and we tell the working people that we bring into our meetings and into our party that we're fighting for the ideas of a guy that was a miner, an American miner, right? Like you, or a fellow American worker like you, that's going to be tactically a lot better. And not only tactically, but it's only logical. We're in the U.S. Especially we have a strong tradition of socialism. Let's use our tradition. That doesn't mean we don't have to read Marx. I mean, for God's fucking sake, I got a Marx portrait behind me, and I've read basically everything. But that doesn't mean that we also can't use it. We should use it, but where we could use our own theorists, let's use them, right? Um, I think that's the project that we're trying to. I think no, that is the project that we're trying to promote here at Midwestern Marx. Um, so if you stick around and watch the whole thing, uh, thank you. I hope that I was able to help you in some way. If you have any questions, please uh, don't be afraid to comment them. If you want to get in contact with us, um, you can do so through our email, through our website, um, various ways you can get in contact with us. If you want to come on board and write for us, or if you want to participate with us as an artist or a poet in our upcoming journal on January 15th, You can email us at midwesternmarks.com. What? midwesternmarks@gmail.com. Yeah, midwesternmarks@gmail.com. The same name that we have here on the YouTube at gmail.com. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.